on the big 89 WLS. Matt Bubala in for Steve Cochran today with Andrea Darlas here next to me. Nick Gale in the newsroom. And joining us on the phone right now is Dr. Gregory Jantz. He's the author of So Much to Live For, The Anxiety Reset, Healing Depression for Life. He's the founder of the Center, A Place for Hope, A Place of Hope. The Center, A Place of Hope. Dr. Jantz, thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Good morning. Good to be with you. Such an important topic.
It really is. And I know that, we don't know why Matthew Perry passed away, but it certainly has brought the issues of addiction, depression back into the limelight while we wait to find out what truly happened. He certainly talked a lot with his memoir that was out last year about the struggles he's gone through. And it brings it back to a topic we certainly all want to talk about and understand a little better, especially those of us who maybe deal with issues or have friends and we don't quite know how to talk to them or understand the issues they might be going through. So in general, please tell us a little bit about how you, I guess, first, identifying yourself. I would imagine that for many people, Matthew Perry certainly got to a place where he understood his struggles and his addictions. I think for a lot of people, there's a time where you don't understand that you might need help, that you might have trouble. Talk to us about how you kind of figure that out when you're going through things.
Absolutely. In the last 39 years of treating addiction and depression, anxiety, one of the trends that we've seen is post-COVID, addiction rates have truly skyrocketed. From alcohol to even misuse of prescription drugs, overall addictions have skyrocketed. And Matthew Perry laid out, his struggle, and his struggle is not uncommon. And addiction, think of it this way: it's a ticking time bomb. Eventually, because addiction, no matter what form, is self-destructive, and ultimately it can take our life. And so this is what we're seeing. We're seeing the fentanyl crisis. We're seeing addiction in all levels of our society right now at all-time highs. So you said it so nicely. The first thing you got to do is go, okay, I've got to be truthful and honest and take a look at reality, because the first struggle we have with addiction is just denying it. We'll say, it's not that big a deal. It's only involving me, or you don't understand. I have to have this in order to function. And we tell ourselves all these things. It's really ultimately delusional because it's distorting reality.
Dr. Jantz, Matthew Perry, this really hit very hard. Of course, I'm a Friends fan, and, he's a little older than me, but around the same age. I know, and I read the book, and I watched his interviews, and he said he spent half of his life in and out of rehab. And what struck me is he said all of his friends, all of the cast, they stayed very close, but Jennifer Aniston was the one who pulled him aside and said, "We know you're drinking. We know you're using. You need to get help." So my question to you is, should you be that friend? If you see someone who has a problem, pull them aside, or is it very hard to walk that line to say, you need to get some help?
I so appreciate this question. A lot of times we look at it and we go, something's not right here. And inside you know. And so to ignore it is a way of enabling it to continue. And God bless her, from my vantage point, for speaking up, because that's what we need to do. We need to say, I love you, care enough about you that I'm going to say something here. Something's really out of order. I don't have all the details, but I do know that you are. And if it's but speak up and tell the truth. Now, that's bold and brave, and sometimes there's a huge defensive reaction to that, but you're also speaking truth into that person's life. And ultimately, that's what starts to get their attention. They know, because there's shame in knowing, okay, people are figuring this out. And sometimes that's a huge motivator.
Dr. Jantz, we talk about depression, we talk about addiction. How much are those hand in hand, and how much can those be separated?
Yes, what we've noticed is, particularly as anxiety rates go up. So right now, anxiety is our number one diagnosis in our country. Think about that. Number one diagnosis. So that's typically not a medical diagnosis, but it's a number one diagnosis. Anytime anxiety followed by depression, when those two go up, we see a big increase in addiction. Anxiety can be that tipping point. It's like, I can't cope anymore. I need to do something. Well, as human beings, sometimes we choose self-destructive things in order to cope, and we get into that pattern. So anxiety's high, you're going to see high addiction rates.
Anxiety is high, and there's a lot going on in the world. There's no doubt, right? We're currently, right now with the Middle East, a couple of years ago with the pandemic, we've been through a lot as a society in the last couple of years. Is a high rate of anxiety always based on what's happening in the world, or is some of that something that we need to do a better job of preparing people for? Like, are we ill-equipped maybe to handle everything in the world right now, or are we just much more cognizant of it compared to like when we were kids, Andrea and I growing up? If we were upset, hurt, there would be a lot more, oh my God, you're fine. Go to school, you deal with it. We didn't talk about things. We didn't go to therapists nearly as much as we do now. So Dr. Jantz, is it an issue where maybe we aren't as prepared, or are we just so much more aware of anxiety, willing to talk about it, willing to seek help for it?
Well, I think we are more aware, which is good news. But we look at, post-pandemic, we're in a mental health, and I'm going to use the word epidemic. The numbers of people seeking help for mental health issues, we've never seen it this high. And the ability, and it doesn't matter what state you live in, the ability to address that with adequate providers and adequate care is, we're deficient. And there's not the help available for the number of people seeking help. So people turn to, I understand it, it's normal. We turn to addiction in order to feel differently. So we need to address mental health. You think about, well, who was my mental health mentor that showed me how to deal with issues in life? It's like nothing we really were taught. We might have had a good role model. We might have had really poor role models. So we need to address this mental health crisis. And we're at the very beginning. We haven't hit the peak yet. You watch over the next few years, this is going to get worse, and we need to be available to help.
When someone realizes that they need help, and you've seen these interviews with Matthew Perry where he says, I knew I needed help. What are the first steps to take?
Well, that's the first step. I need help. And it's just an honest, I realize, wow, this is out of control. I need help. So the asking for help is really powerful, and it's the first step. The next step is, well, take the baby step, and maybe it's making some phone calls. Maybe it's finding out, well, what are my resources? But if you say I need help, you are opening the door to possibilities that the whole direction of your life can change. Hang on. If you're told, man, you're going to be put on a waiting list, that's okay. Get on the list. But an opportunity to get help, you'll never, ever regret. And it doesn't matter. Sometimes people go through multiple, we call it rehab. A lot of times, though, we need to get to what's those core issues that's causing me to keep relapsing. And that's what we really have to address. And, that's what we've been doing here for the last 39 years. You got to deal with the core issues.
We're speaking with Dr. Gregory Jantz, the author of So Much to Live For, The Anxiety Reset, and Healing Depression for Life. Dave from Crystal Lake has a question. You could jump in there as well. We'll take your calls when we come back on the Big 89 WLS. Matt Bubala in for Steve Cochran here with Andrea Darlas and Nick Gale. And Dr. Gregory Jantz is speaking with us. His books are So Much to Live For, The Anxiety Reset, and Healing Depression for Life. Thank you so much for being with us, Dr. Jantz. Let me get right to a phone call. Dave in Crystal Lake has a question for you. Hey, Dave, you're on the Big 89 WLS.
Good morning. How you doing?
We're great. Thank you.
I was listening to Matthew Perry last night on one of his interviews, and he said, you know what, it depended. You saw me on TV and I was heavy set, I was drinking. If you saw me and I looked skinny, I was on pills. It seems to me there was a whole lot more than a addiction going on there if he could just jump on one substance to another with abuse like that.
Interesting. Let's hear what Dr. Jantz has to say.
Well, yes, and sometimes we call that dancing between addictions. We begin to exchange one for the other, and we actually end up rotating our addictions. We've never got to the core issues. We've never addressed, but we're just exchanging addictions, and so that's a good observation.
Dr. Jantz, we talk about it when something like this happens, when somebody famous passes away and the addictions of alcohol or drugs are so talked about. But I wonder if you could bring that down to smaller things like little addictions we have to food or to our phone or to overworking or not, different things like that in our life. Are there many more addictions that we don't talk about but are the same thing, us not getting to our real issues?
Yes, there are. We can use a lot of escapism and avoidance behaviors. You mentioned food. Well, there certainly is food addiction and eating disorders, and we can turn to food. The other one, and I'm so glad you mentioned this, technology. Absolutely. There's a huge one. So, we're a facility where people come and stay. We get to see them for average of 4 weeks. And one of the things you do is you check in anything with a screen. I can tell you 80% of our clients who check in their screens show the signs of addiction. Sweaty palms, heart rate goes up, irritability. I got to have my cell phone. I forgot to tell somebody something. But that's the first 3 days. After about the third day, things settle down and a person goes, you know what? I think I feel a whole lot better. And actually, we do allow them to access their devices later on. And many choose not to. They go, you know what? That's a problem for me.
It really is easy for it to become a problem. I think it's two things. One is spending too much time on it, doom scrolling, as we call it, right? Where you just get addicted and you watch things over and over. My kids do this, and I fall into the trap too. The other thing with it is this, I don't know if it's fear of missing out or just fear of a better life. Like we see so many people post about, what they want to give off as what their life is. And I think we take that in and then feel like for ourselves, like we're missing out, we have a lesser life, and that becomes this dangerous cycle too.
Oh, and the first thing we do is compare. Yeah. And a lot of times we're not even comparing to reality. My goodness, Instagram is the breeding ground for comparisons. Okay, so I did a book on social media and depression. What we know, bottom line is, the more time you spend in social media, if you're already depressed, it makes your symptoms worse every time. And so we do know as a diversion and avoidance, if you ask a person, how long were you on your social media? Oh, maybe an hour, but it was really 5 hours. It's kind of like, how many beers did you have? Well, I had one, but they had a six-pack. So we lose sense of time and we deny how deep our involvement is.
What is your recommendation for, I know you're saying get away from it, but we're in this realm now, right? There is social media. We're not going to get away from it completely. I have a friend who gets so upset at certain things that they see online. And I'm like, why don't you just block that person? Why don't you just avoid? Yeah. Is that something we need to, if we accept we're going to be part of social media, we're going to see it, we're going to do it, controlling at least what is coming into our feeds, trying to avoid the stuff that maybe sends us off that deep end and into more of a depressive or angry state after we look at it?
I think we need to have social media boundaries. And there's the boundary of time, how much time. And if you can set a timer and say, and when it goes off, I'm done. If you can do that, good. There's also the boundary of really what do I want to be feeding my mind? Is this, like you said, doom scrolling? And ultimately, am I using this to avoid doing other things? And, my last hour before bedtime, am I on right up till time to fall asleep? What's the last thing I'm putting in my mind? I used to work in sleep research, and I can tell you it will affect your sleep.
Boy, I do that same thing, and we shouldn't. And I know we have to let you go in a few minutes here, but I wanted to ask you, I know a lot of people were, we're talking about the death of Matthew Perry. That's what spurred the conversation. But a lot of people, Dr. Jantz, have said, well, but he seems to have gotten sober. I thought he was okay. I mean, we don't know the cause of death, but even if he was recovered, the long-term effects of addiction can always haunt you and be there.
Absolutely. There's a toll that happens physically, and you look at the number of surgeries and so forth that he had, and there was chronic pain as well. So we want to look at this really with great compassion and understand that, this is a trap that actually any of us could have fallen into.
Right.
He was just a very visible demonstration of what can happen with addiction.
What do you hope comes out of something like this when something becomes this public? Do you worry that this drives more? I guess the hope is by driving some awareness, we have discussions like this and people know how to say something, as Andrea talked about earlier, speaking up when they are worried about something or realizing something in ourselves before it's too late. Mm-hmm.
Yes, awareness is huge. Okay, let's talk about it because otherwise it's kind of denied. And the other, I hope it's an encouragement. I hope it's a motivation to really do something. If you're hearing our voices and you're struggling, now is the time. Don't wait. Don't wait till it goes over the edge. Don't wait till you're in despondency and despair, and maybe you feel like you're already there. Today could be a life-saving decision. And part of what my goal is I want to save lives.
One last question before we go. I know we talked about how do you address it with somebody? How do you bring up something like this? Once you know somebody is recovering, once you know they've acknowledged they have depression or they have addiction issues, how should we be handling that as friends, not knowing how to bring something up, how to ask how they're doing? What is the guideline for how to live life with a friend who has addiction or depression issues?
Well, we want to practice a lot of acceptance of who they are, not necessarily behaviors, but to do check-ins. I mean, really, the power of saying, hey, is it okay if I check in with you? How are you really doing? I love and care about you. Those are powerful. Show that you really do. Sometimes we're afraid to check in. If I say anything, what's going to happen? But be a friend, be a loved one who cares enough to keep checking in.
Yeah. And I'm glad you said hear our voices too, because if somebody, it's okay to call and say, I need help. I don't know what to do. What should I do? But I know I need to do something.
And there you go. There's the invitation. And then I'm going to say, as that friend or loved one, I'm going to say, you know what? Let's work together. Let's look at what the options are. And can I help you and be involved in that? And just to come alongside, start making those phone calls, start looking at what are options. Sometimes we'll use it, well, it's expensive, or I don't know, my insurance will cover. There's a lot of barriers we can throw up, but let's keep going. You'll never regret it.
Dr. Gregory Jantz is the founder of the Center, A Place of Hope. We really appreciate you taking the time today, Dr. Jantz.